Lucy, let me out of here.
Untie this coat.
Not until you kiss and make up. I'll never speak to him again after the things he said to me.
What about the things you've said to me? She said my mother looks like a weasel.
In 1950, when she first walked onto the set of I Love Lucy, Vivian Vance immediately looked at William Frawley, the man who would play her husband for many years afterward, with hatred and resentment. She saw William Frawley as a stain on her professional life. The curses, the contemptuous glances behind the scenes lasted for years, to the point that many believed this was one of the most vicious feuds in the history of American sitcoms. And the truth was exactly that. The day William Frawley died, Hollywood was shaken once again when people claimed Vivian raised a glass and coldly said, "Let's all raise a toast." Why did a woman hate her co-star to the bone? Or behind all those terrifying rumors, was there still another truth that had never been told? To understand that, we have to go back long before Vivian became Ethel Mertz. From a young age, Vivian showed artistic talent, loved the stage, adored music, and constantly looked for ways to appear in school performances. But that passion was not supported by her mother, who believed acting was not an appropriate path for a woman. That opposition made Vivian's youth tense and suffocating. But the more she was restrained, the more she wanted to escape her old life. In her early 20s, Vivian moved to Albuquerque, New Mexico, where she began seriously studying acting and joining local theater groups. Those years were far from glamorous, but it was those small stages and little-known roles that helped her sharpen the razor-sharp comedic instincts that all of America would later remember. Afterward, Vivian continued on to New York, where her career truly changed. During the 1930s and 1940s, she gradually built a name for herself on Broadway thanks to her natural comedic talent, strong presence, and rare versatility. She appeared in famous productions such as The Voice of the Turtle and Hooray for What. Though she was not Broadway's biggest star, Vivian was still regarded by the theater world as an extremely intelligent actress with a unique magnetism every time she stepped onto the stage. But television was what turned her into a legend. When Lucille Ball and Desi Arnaz were preparing to create I Love Lucy, they needed an actress who could stand beside Lucille without being overshadowed. Many believed Vivian was too young and too attractive to play a middle-aged wife like Ethel Mertz. But Lucille Ball saw something in her that others did not. Sharpness, perfect comedic timing, and an energy strong enough to balance the entire show. Vivian was eventually cast as Ethel Mertz, the best friend and neighbor constantly dragged into Lucy Ricardo's crazy schemes. Her on-screen husband was Fred Mertz, played by William Frawley, an actor far older than Vivian. On screen, they created such incredible comedic chemistry that audiences believed they were a couple born to act together. Their arguments, complaints, and perfectly synchronized performances quickly became an iconic part of American television. Yet behind the scenes, the story between them was more tense than ever. At the time Vivian Vance first stepped onto the set of I Love Lucy in the early 1950s, she had no idea that the man smoking in the corner of the room would become the person she hated most in the world. While audiences laughed hysterically every time they appeared together, behind the scenes their relationship was slowly turning into one of the most famous feuds in Hollywood sitcom history. By then, William Frawley was already a Hollywood veteran, more than 2 decades older than Vivian, with an aged appearance, a raspy voice, and a notoriously bad temper. Frawley had appeared in over 100 films, including famous works such as Miracle on 34th Street and Going My Way. In the film industry, everyone knew he was a highly skilled actor. But along with that talent came a reputation that was far from pleasant. He was known for being hot-tempered, difficult to work with, and especially for being a heavy alcoholic. At one point, many studios began avoiding hiring Frawley because they feared the trouble he might cause behind the scenes. Meanwhile, Vivian Vance came from the Broadway stage with the image of a sharp, charming actress who still saw herself as the kind of woman attractive enough to play romantic leading roles. No one thought these two opposite personalities would be paired as husband and wife on television. At first, William Frawley was cast as Fred Mertz almost before Vivian. CBS actually did not want to hire him because they worried he drank too much and might cause trouble on set. But Desi Arnaz liked Frawley's seasoned demeanor and dry comedic style, so he insisted on keeping him at all costs. Desi even set a strict condition that if Frawley showed up drunk, he would be fired immediately. William agreed. Then, a few weeks later, Vivian Vance was brought in to audition for Ethel Mertz. That was the first time the two truly met. From that very moment, something already felt wrong. Vivian looked at William and was nearly stunned when she learned she would be playing his wife. She was 22 years younger than him. In Vivian's eyes, William looked more like a grumpy old man than a suitable co-star. There are many stories claiming that after the audition, Vivian complained to people on the crew that she did not want to be turned into an old wife on television, when in real life she was still attractive and youthful. Unfortunately for her, those words eventually reached William Frawley's ears, and for a man with as much pride as Frawley, that was almost a declaration of war. From then on, the atmosphere between them became icy. William Frawley was famous for holding grudges. He began mocking Vivian with unpleasant nicknames and frequently attacking her appearance right on set. Vivian was no less fierce. She hated his rudeness, his crude behavior, and the smell of alcohol that constantly lingered around Frawley. Many crew members said the two barely had any genuinely friendly conversations. They only spoke when the cameras were about to roll or when rehearsing scenes. Season after season, the small sarcastic remarks turned into real attacks. Though they maintained professionalism in front of the cameras, in real life they could hardly stand each other. Sometimes the jokes in the script even became ways for both of them to throw bitterness at one another right in front of the audience without anyone realizing it. Vivian started calling Frawley sarcastic nicknames behind the scenes, while Frawley retaliated with even crueler remarks. And from there, one of the most famous feuds in Hollywood sitcom history officially began. According to many behind-the-scenes stories passed around television circles, William Frawley was not only irritated by Vivian Vance, he often looked for ways to hurt her with cruel mockery. At one point, he was said to have suggested that the writers add a line describing Ethel as looking like a sack stuffed with doorknobs, simply to insult Vivian's appearance. Those were no longer harmless jokes between colleagues, but clearly personal insults. Vivian Vance did not suffer in silence either. She responded with equally cold sarcasm, frequently mocking Frawley's age and elderly appearance behind the scenes. The longer they worked together, the more vicious the attacks became. The two practically turned hurting one another into part of their relationship. People who were on set at the time said the atmosphere would become tense the moment Vivian and Frawley entered the same room together. The strange thing was that the more tense they were in real life, the more perfect they became on screen. Fred and Ethel Mertz quickly became one of America's most beloved couples. Their arguments, sarcastic remarks, and annoyed looks toward each other felt so natural that audiences believed they were truly married. Lucille Ball later said their real-life hostility accidentally helped their chemistry explode on screen. William had an old-school deadpan style of comedy, while Vivian brought energetic performances and extremely expressive reactions. Those two elements colliding created classic sitcom scenes. Despite hating each other, they remained extremely professional once the cameras started rolling. Vivian understood that William had excellent comedic timing, and William knew Vivian possessed a rare instinct for stage reactions. Some scenes had to be performed over and over for hours under the intense pressure of a live studio audience, yet the two still worked together almost perfectly. That confused many members of the crew. Just minutes earlier, they had been cold toward one another, yet once in character they looked like a couple who had lived together for decades. One of the clearest signs of the tension between them appeared when Desi Arnaz wanted to create a spin-off series for Fred and Ethel after the enormous success of I Love Lucy. William Frawley loved the idea because he believed the pair could continue making huge amounts of money and maintain their fame for years. But Vivian Vance immediately refused. She did not want to spend another decade working alone with William. That decision truly enraged Frawley. To him, this was not just Vivian rejecting a television project. He felt humiliated and betrayed. According to many accounts, Frawley believed Vivian had destroyed the last opportunity of his career simply because of personal dislike. After that, he became even more open about speaking badly about her in conversations and private interviews. Caught in the middle of all that tension was Desi Arnaz, the man who had to protect Vivian Vance while also being the person who had once believed in William Frawley when almost all of Hollywood had turned its back on him. Arnaz clearly understood these two people would never be able to work together again. In the end, the spin-off idea was completely canceled, and Hollywood accepted that Fred and Ethel could only exist within I Love Lucy. In his memoir, Arnaz believed William Frawley had disliked Vivian almost from the beginning. According to him, not long after Vivian was cast as Ethel Mertz, Frawley made deeply unpleasant remarks about her, criticizing Vivian's singing voice, criticizing her acting, and bluntly saying she annoyed the hell out of him. Over time, that irritation became even more obvious. Frawley frequently complained that Vivian interfered too much in musical and dance scenes. He disliked her giving suggestions on set, believing it was not her place. In Frawley's eyes, Vivian was too confident and sometimes crossed limits he considered appropriate for a female co-star at that time. Meanwhile, Vivian saw Frawley as a rude, conservative man who liked controlling everything around him. However, not everyone believed all the blame came from Frawley. Greg Oppenheimer, the son of producer Jess Oppenheimer, once said Vivian truly felt uncomfortable with the age difference between them from the very beginning. She once joked that nobody could believe she would marry such an old man on screen. When that comment reached Frawley's ears, it was like fuel thrown onto the fire of his already enormous pride. What made the story even more complicated was that many people close to the production insisted Vivian did not truly hate Frawley in the way the public imagined. According to some accounts, her sarcastic remarks were sometimes simply Vivian's familiar sense of biting humor. But others believed that behind those jokes was disappointment and hurt built up over years of working together. Perhaps the truth lay somewhere in between. Both of them were too proud, too stubborn, and neither wanted to be the first to back down. The only certainty was that the relationship was never repaired. Even years after I Love Lucy ended, William Frawley continued making cruel remarks about Vivian Vance. One of the most shocking stories happened while he was working on My Three Sons. During a visit from military guests to the set, someone asked Frawley what Vivian was like in real life. Without hesitation, he immediately answered with such a vicious insult that the entire set reportedly fell silent. That showed time had done nothing to ease his resentment. On the contrary, it seemed only to make everything sink deeper. And when William Frawley died in 1966, Vivian Vance's reaction caused even more intense gossip in Hollywood. According to many stories, while attending a dinner party and hearing news of Frawley's death, Vivian raised her glass and said, "Let's all raise a toast." No one knows exactly how accurate that story is, but it quickly became one of Hollywood's most famous legends. After Frawley's death, Vivian never publicly expressed grief for him. There was no deathbed reconciliation, no apology, and no final moment bringing an end to the hatred that had lasted for years. For both of them, the bitterness seemed to survive until the very end of their lives. And perhaps the saddest thing is that neither of them was completely innocent. Frawley's cruel remarks certainly hurt Vivian, but Vivian's comments about his age and appearance were no less vicious. What do you think about the conflicted relationship between the two of them? Share your thoughts in the comments below. But William Frawley was not the only tense relationship Vivian Vance had behind the scenes of I Love Lucy. Between Vivian and Lucille Ball, there was also a silent war filled with jealousy, pressure, and overwhelming egos. At one point, the two women could barely stand each other as Vivian became increasingly beloved by audiences, while Lucille began feeling that her spotlight was being threatened. But strangely, after all those conflicts, they gradually became the women who understood each other the most. A complicated, intense friendship that lasted until the end of their lives, completely different from the rumors of a legendary feud Hollywood had embroidered for years. From the very first days on the set of I Love Lucy, Vivian Vance had to face skepticism from Lucille Ball herself. When Vance first appeared with hair the same color, an attractive figure, and youthful beauty, Ball bluntly declared that Vance could not play Ethel Mertz. Ball came from the old-school belief that women more beautiful than herself should never appear on screen beside her, and she demanded Vance be fired immediately. But Vivian Vance was not someone who gave up easily. Instead of arguing, she asked Ball one smart question. What did Ethel Mertz look like? When Ball described Ethel as short, overweight, wearing ill-fitting clothes with badly dyed blonde hair and dark roots showing, Vance replied that she could not transform herself that same week, but she could by the next week. She kept her promise, dyeing her hair brassy blonde with dark roots, wearing padded undergarments and clothes one size too small to make herself look shorter and heavier, and giving up the girdles all women wore at the time. That dedication and sacrifice completely changed Ball's attitude. It took several months of filming before Ball truly realized how valuable Vance's talent was. Ball noticed that while she and Desi Arnaz worked very well together, the real perfect duo was Lucy and Ethel. From then on, their friendship developed so strongly that they became emotional support for each other during the darkest moments of their lives. Still, things were not always smooth. Like any sisterly relationship, they also had moments of tension and conflict. One of the most famous incidents happened during a pregnancy episode, when Ball was given a dressing room directly on stage because she was pregnant, while Vance had to rush around changing costumes 3 times in a very short amount of time. When Vance arrived late, Ball scolded her for making the audience wait. Vance fired back with a line that became legendary. "I'd tell you to go screw yourself, but I see your husband already takes care of that." Ball burst out laughing, but the two women reportedly did not speak to each other for nearly a week afterward. The biggest crack between them came when Ball began producing The Lucy Show in the 1960s. By then, Vance had married her 4th husband and was living in Connecticut. She requested a higher-paying contract and wanted more creative input into the scripts. Those demands were rejected, and Vance left the show. But as Vance herself later admitted, they allowed men, wedges that should never have existed, to come between them. Despite the professional fallout, their friendship survived and even became stronger after they stopped working together. In a 1974 interview, Vance spoke glowingly about Ball, saying Ball was a talented and determined woman, and that one reason they remained close friends was because each woman compensated for what the other lacked. However, along with the success of I Love Lucy becoming a nationwide phenomenon, Vivian Vance was living in a completely different reality. Her personal life was filled with failed marriages, relationships ending in disappointment and loneliness. She married 4 times, but almost none of those marriages brought lasting peace. After each separation, Vivian became increasingly withdrawn. Vivian Vance married for the first time at just 19 years old on October 6, 1928, to Joseph Shearer Danick Jr., a man who worked in theater. The marriage lasted less than 3 years and ended in divorce in April 1931. Tragically, not long after the divorce, Danick was shot to death during a gunfight with a business rival in Detroit in 1935. Only 2 years after ending her first marriage, Vance remarried George Koch on January 6, 1933. Koch was a musician, but this marriage also failed to bring happiness and ended in divorce in July 1940. Vance was still young, but her first 2 marriages had already left scars on her heart. Then she entered her 3rd marriage with actor Philip Ober on August 12, 1941. At first glance, it seemed like a lasting marriage that endured for 18 years, but behind it lay the darkest story of Vance's life. Ober was a respected actor with a Broadway and film career, often playing high-ranking military officers or powerful businessmen. But when Vance began rising to fame as Ethel Mertz on I Love Lucy in 1951, everything started changing for the worse. Vance's enormous success became the trigger for Ober's jealousy. While she became a star beloved across America, Ober received only minor roles, even appearing as a guest on his wife's own show. The growing difference in fame made Ober increasingly bitter and resentful, and he took out his frustration on Vance through physical and emotional abuse. At one point, Vance arrived on the set of I Love Lucy with a black eye, the result of a beating from Ober. Lucille Ball, her close friend and the star of the show, saw it and was furious. Ball gave Vance a blunt ultimatum. If she did not divorce Ober, Ball would do it for her herself. That threat showed not only Ball's deep concern for her friend, but also how severe the abuse Vance had endured for years truly was. The years of abuse left Vance deeply scarred. She suffered a severe nervous breakdown in 1945 while performing with the touring company of The Voice of the Turtle. In a 1955 article for McCall's magazine, Vance described her horrifying condition. "One day I was normal. The next day I was lying in a hotel bed, my hands trembling uncontrollably, violently nauseous, sobbing for reasons I didn't even understand. She needed almost daily psychiatric treatment, and it took years before she recovered enough to continue acting. Finally, on April 24, 1959, after enduring 18 years, Vivian Vance filed for divorce from Philip Ober on the grounds of extreme cruelty. It was the turning point that freed her from years of hell. That decision was heavily influenced by Lucille Ball, who pushed and supported her in escaping her abusive husband. 2 years after the divorce, in 1961, Vance remarried John Dodds, a book editor from the East Coast. Unlike her previous husbands, Dodds brought Vance real peace and happiness. They moved to Belvedere, California, and lived together until Vance died of bone cancer in 1979. Even though she finally found peace beside John Dodds, the wounds from her marriage to Philip Ober likely never truly healed. Vance never had children. Another sadness in her life, possibly a consequence of the years of abuse. Alongside the sadness in her personal life, her career also caused Vivian Vance pain for many years. She became trapped by the role of Ethel Mertz, and quietly struggled with depression for years, something almost no one dared speak openly about in Hollywood at that time. The pressure of fame, the exhausting work schedule, and the feeling of being trapped inside her own image left Vivian increasingly drained. On screen, she made all of America laugh, but once she left the set, she often fell into long periods of exhaustion and sadness that very few people truly understood. The thing that hurt Vivian most was the very role that brought her to the top. In real life, she was youthful, glamorous, and deeply cared about her appearance. But on television, Ethel Mertz was portrayed as a sloppy middle-aged housewife constantly standing behind Lucy Ricardo. Gradually, the public stopped seeing Vivian as an actress and only saw Mrs. Fred Mertz. Some people even called her by her character's name on the street, as if the real Vivian Vance had never existed. In Hollywood, where youth and beauty determined nearly every opportunity, that became an obsession for Vivian. She began fearing that the greatest success of her life was also the cage trapping her forever. No matter how talented she was, directors and producers only wanted her to continue playing the funny, ordinary woman always standing behind another star. Vivian longed to take on more serious roles, wanted to return to the stage, and prove she had more depth than audiences imagined. After I Love Lucy ended, she continued appearing in The Lucy Show and several other television programs, but nothing could surpass the enormous shadow of Ethel Mertz. No matter where she went, Vivian was always pulled back into the image of that cheerful neighbor from years before. That left her both grateful and bitter. Because the very role that made her famous was also the thing that made her feel she would never be seen for who she truly was. In interviews later in life, Vivian admitted she was deeply hurt by always being viewed as a supporting actress. She did not want to be remembered only as the woman standing beside Lucille Ball. She wanted recognition as a true artist, a woman who had devoted her entire life to stage and television. But Hollywood rarely gave actors the chance to escape the image that made them famous. Not only did she struggle psychologically, but beginning in 1973, she was diagnosed with breast cancer. The terrible disease forced her to undergo a mastectomy and brutally painful rounds of chemotherapy. After those treatments, Vance and her fourth husband, John Dodds, decided to leave their home in Stamford, Connecticut, and move to Belvedere, California in 1974. Moving to Belvedere represented Vance's desire for a different life. There, she found peace in a small house perched above the bay, where she could sit for hours on the deck reading books and gazing at what she called the most beautiful scenery in the world. She loved the simplicity and quietness of life there, and it would also become the place where she left the world behind. Even while battling cancer, Vance still tried to maintain her career. She and Lucille Ball made their final appearance together in the CBS special Lucy Calls the President, which aired on November 21, 1977. That same year, another major health crisis struck. Vance suffered a stroke that partially paralyzed her body. After the stroke, her health deteriorated rapidly. The breast cancer she once battled had metastasized into her bones, becoming bone cancer. Despite fighting hard, the disease was too severe and incurable. In the summer of 1979, knowing she did not have long to live, Vance was staying in a rented home in Marin County. It was there that one of the most emotional moments of her friendship with Lucille Ball took place. Lucille Ball flew in to say a final goodbye to her closest friend. The witness to this heartbreaking meeting was Paige Peterson, the daughter of the homeowner where Vance was staying. Peterson recalled that they brought Vance into the living room where she lay on a couch. The two women had lunch together and talked for a very long time. Peterson remembered hearing them laugh, but toward the end, there was also a great deal of sobbing. Viv knew she was dying. When Lucille Ball left, her face was filled with pain and tears to the point where she could not even speak. Paige Peterson said she believed Viv let go after that. A few days after that fateful meeting, on August 17, 1979, Vivian Vance died in Belvedere, California, at the age of 70. The official cause of death was bone cancer secondary to breast cancer. Her body was cremated and her ashes scattered at sea. After Vance's death, Desi Arnaz stated, "Losing one of the great artists we had the privilege and joy to work with is bad enough, but it's even harder to accept the loss of one of your closest friends." Lucille Ball cried heavily for months afterward over losing Vance. In a 1986 interview while watching old episodes of I Love Lucy, Ball said, "I find that now I spend my time watching Viv. Viv was extraordinary. I loved every gesture Viv made. She truly was a special person." The final years of Vivian Vance's life painted a sad picture of illness and loss, but they were also filled with friendship. She passed away peacefully in the place she loved, and her friendship with Lucille Ball became remembered as one of the most beautiful chapters in Hollywood history. Though she spent her entire life tied to the image of the funny wife Ethel Mertz, Vivian Vance's real life contained far more conflict and loneliness than audiences ever imagined. Her tense relationship with William Frawley became one of Hollywood's most famous behind-the-scenes stories, where two people who could barely get along accidentally created a legendary sitcom couple. But was that hatred entirely real? Or deep beneath all the bitterness did there still exist a mutual respect neither of them was ever soft enough to admit? And what do you think about Vivian Vance and William Frawley? Did they truly hate each other beyond repair, or did Hollywood exaggerate everything into a classic feud to keep audiences fascinated for decades? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. And if you love secret-filled behind-the-scenes stories from classic Hollywood, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and join us for future videos. Thank you for watching.